Was there ever a moment where you kind of like, what did I sign up for? Or were you just like, this is what I wanted
No,
the
I'm
whole time?
like, this is incredible. This is like
Okay.
the best. This is the best job ever.
Yeah,
You
that's
know?
so cool.
Yeah.
Good. True startup life.
What's up, everybody? Thanks for joining us for another episode of the What Worked podcast. Tyler and I are very excited to have a special guest with us today, our friend, Quinten Thompson. Quinten, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yes, of course. This is a long time coming. Quinten, for those of you who don't know him, we brought him on for a lot of reasons, but most recently, the company that he worked at, Vitamin Well, sold last year for $3 billion at a $3 billion valuation. Quinten joined the company 5 or 6 years ago in 2019 as a director of finance, and he was employee number 3 on the U.S. side of the business. So really built the U.S. business from the ground up. Vitamin Well, you might know brands like NOCCO, the beverage, and Barebells, the protein bars. Quinten had a big role in growing the business here in the U.S., but also just transforming what I perceived as like a niche CrossFit product brand into a mainstream kind of universal product that eventually got into Trader Joe's and other retailers like that. So without further ado, Quinten, could you give us a little bit of background for those of you who don't know you, but also for me and Tyler, just like, you know, who are you and what did you do before joining Vitamin Well?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. I have a background in finance and operations. I started my career like a lot of finance and accounting people at a Big Four firm. So I have a degree in accounting from the University of Minnesota. Went to work at PwC as an auditor, like a lot of kids do. Got my CPA and then quickly realized that's not something that I really wanted to do for the rest of my career, but it was a good learning experience, I would say. And then went to work at US Bank after 2.5 years, just for a year in their leverage finance group. So financing LBOs for really mid-market PE firms. So $5 to $50 million in EBITDA, I would say. And then on a whim, I went through a breakup and I'm like, okay, I'm going to move to LA. So I kind of on a whim quit that job. And I really wanted to move to LA for the weather and obviously the city, but really to get involved in startups. So through a mutual friend of Mike and Tyler's and I got connected at an e-cigarette startup, really starting in finance and accounting. And then it kind of grew to a little bit of ops, a little bit of marketing. And by the time I left there, after I think I was there about 5 years, I was doing their product development and global marketing. So we had an office in the US and the UK, and I was actually the one developing these products. For those of you that don't know, the e-cigarette market it was kind of killed by regulation. So that startup really didn't end up working out. And then I somehow, through an old colleague at PwC who actually interviewed for my job that I had at Vitamin Well, I was like, hey, this is not really a job for me based on my background, but you might be interested in this. So found a CEO on LinkedIn at Vitamin Well, emailed them and said, hey, I hear you have this position. I'd like to have this job. And then pretty much within a week, I had interviewed probably 7 different times with multiple people and got the job as the director of finance to start.
That's so cool that you did a cold direct message. I feel like so often I give that advice all the time, but nobody takes me up on it. You had
Yeah.
you done that before or did you just
I,
like
I, I've never done that before. Every other job that I've gotten before, I've kind of knew somebody, had
sure.
some connection to the company, like a lot of people do. He told me about the role at a very high level, and I had seen the product once on a YouTube channel once, and I was like, "Oh, I know what this." At the time, it was just the energy drink. I know what this product is. Sounds cool. Yeah, just cold emailed, and it worked out.
That's how I found out about them too, was, I would watch he's kind of an OG CrossFit YouTuber, Craig Ritchie, and,
That's how I
he
found. That's the guy I knew.
that's so
That's
funny.
how I found out about it.
Yeah, so I used to watch all his old content, and he was always talking about it, and I was like, "Man, this looks, good," and I knew he was all about it, so there you go, we're both getting influenced by the same influencers.
Exactly.
Uh, I gotta ask, and this is maybe me. Sometimes I think I have a little bit of like a cinematic mind. I see things in like movie scenes, right? And so you mentioned that you were doing audit and you knew that wasn't the life for you. Was there a singular moment? Obviously, probably it was maybe death by a thousand paper cuts, but was there a single kind of time where you're like in a basement in some corporate building in, Minnesota and you're like, yeah, I gotta do something else? What was it for you?
It was this busy season of my second year. I was working in Chicago My big client at the time was Ken Griffin's Citadel, his hedge fund. So they flew me out to Chicago for the audit for that. So I was there about 6 months. And during January to March, they wouldn't let me go home every weekend. So they made me stay in Chicago, and I was working 7 days a week, like 12 hours, 14 hours, even on a Sunday. And then at the end of the audit, I remember I got a bad review for that job, and I was really pissed off about it. So I kind of pushed back, and I was like, I was just asking questions and trying to understand why we were doing things the way that we were. It's my second year. I'm not an expert. And the senior at the job gave me feedback, was like, Quinten just asked too many questions. He's trying to like understand too much of the job. And I was like, okay, this is not right for me.
Yeah, that's never a good sign. And I was gonna say, I don't know if did Citadel ever end up any like legal trouble? So I think like any time where like you're asking too many questions, that should be concerning in general
No,
if that's a problem.
no, as far as I knew, they always had a
They're good.
clean,
Yeah.
they're always clean. So
For the
Good,
record,
good.
for the
Okay.
record.
Thumbs up for the
Yeah.
record. For the
for the
record.
record,
We're not trying to break any
Ken, I
news here
didn't
on what
say
we're
anything. So it's always been great.
Yeah. That's awesome. But, it's just funny. I had to ask the story, and I appreciate you humoring me. You hear that so often. People say, I was doing audit and I quickly knew it wasn't for me. And I just the follow-up thing that I always have, not for you, but then I always wonder, I'm like, I need to talk to someone who is like, yeah, this is a thing for me. Because I
Yeah,
so often,
They're
I
out
guess it's
there,
just
yeah.
it's the circles that I run in, really.
for sure. I mean, even when I worked at the bank, we would get these pitch books from investment banks about these companies, and I always felt that it was weird as a 25-year-old who knows nothing, frankly, about running a business, that I'm supposed to judge whether I'm going to give this person $100 million loan. I was like, this doesn't seem right to me. So that was the other part of the reason of why I wanted to like really get involved with the business and kind of grow something, even though it's not my own, but just kind of be there from the ground.
I want to piggyback on what you just said, Q, like about what you were looking for, but I didn't know you had so much conviction about wanting the job at Vitamin Well. When you reached out to the CEO, you said, like, I want this job. In retrospect, like you made a great decision, right? Things have panned out. It's like kind of the dream if anyone's trying to join an early stage startup or CPG company. This is the outcome everyone's hoping for. But what was it about the job or Vitamin Well at the time where you're like, I want this job. This is a place for me.
I was just going based on what my old colleague had described to me. I knew that at the time they just had two employees. So they had the CEO, and he had hired a field sales rep to kind of go door to door to gyms in LA and sell this drink. But like I mentioned to Tyler, I had seen this product on this YouTuber who's based in the UK. So I had done some research and found out, okay, it's a Swedish based company. They kind of are distributed around the UK, Germany, France, Spain at the time. So I was like, okay, it's starting in the US as this startup in the US market. But it kind of was this comforting feeling of, oh, there's kind of this mothership parent that is somewhat successful because at least from what I can see, I have no idea of what they're financially successful, but they look successful. That's kind of was a safety blanket, if you will, that felt
Yeah.
Mhm.
kind of nice. And then I had met my boss, the CEO in the US. He was from Red Bull for 20-25 years. We just kind of clicked right off the bat. I think we have very similar like ways of communicating and sense of humors. And I was like, okay, it just felt right off the bat. I left that first interview, and I was like, look, I know I have to meet like our CFO or head of accounting or whatever, and all these other people, but like, I'm not concerned with this. Like, I really want this job, and it just felt right.
That's amazing, and you get the job, spoiler alert, so you get
Get the
it,
job.
and I'm just curious, you mentioned big giant parent company, but ultimately you were joining basically a new business unit, acting as a startup, essentially, a startup within
Yeah.
a larger company. What did you inherit with the job? What was actually there? Was there anything? It sounds like you had a boss who had a pretty good, proven track record, I imagine, with Red Bull, but outside of that, what was there?
So at the time, I believe we had about 500,000 cans of product at some random warehouse in Carson.
Okay.
Um, there was no mechanism to ship the product or get the product anywhere. I just know it was there sitting in Carson. We were stuffed into the conference room, not even a conference room. I would say like maybe a 10 by 10 room, side meeting room in a marketing agency that our global CEO was on the board of. So we were
Yep,
like
yep.
stuffed in this other business.
We know how this
Um,
goes.
we had a bunch of product kind of scattered throughout the office. So, I was sitting at my desk that was, a glorified folding table with like product behind me. Um,
Yeah,
and then I remember my boss got his first sale,
yeah.
and he came in with like he went to Staples that day and got a receipt pad, and he hands me this piece of paper that's like 2 cases of Caribbean Naco. And he's like, "Hey, I
No.
don't know what we're supposed to do with this, but like,
Yeah.
just go figure that out." And I was
Oh
like,
my god.
"Okay, cool." So we were really starting from scratch. I mean, we had a QuickBooks account. We had 500,000 cans. At the time, we didn't have a payroll system. We had no benefits. We didn't have 401k. We had nothing. We had QuickBooks, we had cans, and we had, now 3 people.
Was there ever a moment where you had like an "oh shit" moment where you kinda like, "What did I sign up for?" Or were you just like, "This is what I wanted,"
No,
the
I'm
whole
like,
time?
this is incredible. This is like the best. This
Okay.
is the best job ever.
Yeah.
You
That's
know?
so cool.
Yeah.
Good. True startup life.
Yeah, so you came in as like director of finance, but you obviously needed to do a bunch of different things. Walk us through like that 0 to 1. What did that entail for you?
Yeah, it's funny because when I started, it was director of finance, so it was okay. I'm going to be closing the books and stuff like that. But then it quickly morphed into, well, we actually don't have anyone for ops. So I kind of just quickly was everything that wasn't sales or marketing related was kind of owned by me. So whether that be our systems, our warehouse, how do we get products to customers, how do we charge customers, all of that stuff had to be set up. So I think the first thing that was on my agenda was after I got that paper receipt, I was
Yeah.
like, okay, we need to figure out a way how to charge customers,
Yeah.
and record these sales. And then secondly, I have to figure out how to even get product to customers because we had our CEO and our sales rep were going in the field and doing these deliveries. But I realized quickly that that's not going to be how they're going to do every delivery. And we'll probably just FedEx the 4 or 5 cases that they order when they do their reorder. So that meant, going to the warehouse, talking to them, figuring out what their capabilities were. And then the next thing after that was, okay, well, how do we get paid? My boss was like, oh, well, we can just get a check or cash. And again, I'm like, okay, all these small gym businesses. I know there's a lot of gyms out there. The gym business is tough. I know that these guys aren't great at paying their bills. So, okay, we need to figure out a way to store their credit card on file and automatically charge them for the shipment. So it was kind of just how do I figure out or how do we figure out one step at a time as a problem rises? Okay, what's going to work for this and what's going to at least work for the next like year and a half or so. And I'm not trying to build up something that's going to work forever, but what's going to just help us now.
Totally. And did you have for a lot of those things that you needed to put in place, did you feel like you could pull a lot from your, previous experience with the e-cig company? How deep did you get into operations at that company?
I didn't do a lot of operations. I know, in my interview, I was like, yeah, I know a little bit about operations. And
Sure.
I knew that we sent stuff on trucks and we had a freight broker. And that's the extent of what I knew. But I also had, at least from my finance perspective at the vape company, I knew that a lot of the customers, these were small independent vape shops across the country that we would sell to, also larger distributors. And the larger distributors we gave terms to, the small independent vape shops, like we weren't shipping until we got paid, whether it was through like a Zelle or a Chase Quick Pay, or we had their credit card on file and we would charge them. So I kind of drew that connection together of like, okay, we're probably going to do the same thing here. Let's put that together.
That's amazing. There was accounts receivables that like lessons that you'd learned before. That's a huge one. I feel like, it's just being able to avoid, I'm sure, without that knowledge, there's the potential to get stuck with a huge, list of sort of overdue accounts and nobody has any money to pay.
For sure.
When you couldn't draw like on your past experiences to figure some of these things out, like what did you do? I'm always curious to like what someone's
Yes.
framework or playbook is for like figuring something out for the first
Google,
time.
right?
There's lots of Googling.
Yep.
So I
Today would be
remember my
ChatGPT.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. I remember my second week, my boss was like, "We need to figure out how to get cars for our sales reps."
Wow.
I've never done I mean, I've bought my own personal car, but, like, setting up a
Yeah.
fleet account and managing all that,
Sure.
I've never done before. So, I was like, "Okay, well, we kind of like these Mazda CX-5s, and there's a Mazda dealership down the street from us." So, I just go into the dealership, like, very, like, I don't know what's happening. I'm like, "Hey, I wanna lease, like, 5 cars from you," and they're looking at me like, "Okay, what are you talking about?" I'm like, "Oh, I have to work for this company, blah, blah, blah." And they're like, "No, that's not really gonna work." So I was like, "Okay." So they weren't really helpful, and then I went back and just kind of Googled fleet management, fleet services, whatever. I emailed probably 30 different companies, and usually when you email these companies, you have to say, "What's the size of the business?" and all this, and at the time, like, we have no revenue, we have nothing. So to underwrite leases for us, like, I get would be difficult. But luckily, about 3 people emailed me back. I got on the phone call with them and just asked them really stupid questions like, "Okay, this is my situation. How can I go about doing this?" "No, no, your company's too small." "Okay, what if I give you a larger deposit? What if I do this?" "Okay, whatever." And then this one random guy in Wisconsin, a field sales rep for a company out of Ohio, was like, "I can get this done for you." And he ended up being our fleet provider for the next 5 years.
Shout out to that guy.
And
Wow,
I think at a peak, we had, like, 30 cars with
Amazing.
him.
that's very relatable. Mike and I have that same type of story, not with fleet, but basically with many other key business things that you need. And it's so defeating because you go to all these companies, and you're like, "Hey, I would love to give you my business." And they're like, you got to be bigger, buddy." And you're like,
Yeah,
"Where are
exactly.
these boutique providers? They're hard to find."
Yeah. No, Google is your best friend, and just having the courage to ask stupid questions. I feel like a lot of people don't wanna sound stupid, and if you once you get over that, like, you can learn so much more.
That's 2 takeaways. I don't wanna, like, go without, like, re-emphasizing other things, like, ask stupid questions, don't be afraid to do that, and I really like the detail you shared. You contacted 30 providers, and, like, 3 called you back. That's always helpful for me, just so, like, I think a lot of times, you might get discouraged after contacting, like, 4 or 5, and no one's getting back to you, but you're like, "No, I gotta contact 30, and hopefully one of them gets back to me." Luckily, 3 did, and 1 worked out.
Yeah, and probably by like the 30th, I mean, you were probably emailing, I imagine, with a lot of them, but humor me. It's like if you're having 30 conversations, what I always think is so effective about doing things like that is by the 30th conversation, you've like learned the lingo. You're like, the first
Yeah.
conversation, you're like, "Hello, I need 5 cars." And then you can like, you're like, by the 30th one, you're talking their like fleet language. You're like, "Here's what I need. Here's the length of time I need. Here's where we're going to
Like,
be
I
the
need a
amount
service contract, I need a
this many
registration
miles a
management.
day. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think that's what's so great about doing those exercises is like it always blows my mind when somebody just, talks to the first company and they're like, "Here you go." It's just so helpful to actually like learn. You can learn so much from those conversations.
Yeah, 100%.
So you're getting started, you're figuring things out, you're getting your fleet of vehicles, you're hiring your initial sales reps, you're kind of getting some initial systems in place. Um, at this point, what products did Vitamin Well actually have? And then how did that change over time?
I guess I'll go back to the main products that Vitamin Well sells, as a total business. So 2008, we launched our first product, which is called Vitamin Well. That's not sold in the US, so you won't really see it anywhere. But it's very similar to Coca-Cola's Vitamin Water if you've had that product. Granted, it's much better than Vitamin Water. I think Vitamin Water is terrible. If you go to Europe and you can find a Vitamin Well, I trust me, you should buy it. It's very delicious. And then in 2014, they developed the brand NOCCO, which is the energy drink. So, as kind of Mike previously mentioned, they really focused on that CrossFit community really to start. It's broadened a lot since then, but that was kind of their starting point when CrossFit was super hot back then in the early tens.
Can I chime in with my own really quick review on the energy drink? This is what I'll say as someone who considers himself an energy drink connoisseur, aficionado, if you will. The two things I'll say is the flavors are always really good. They're not too like kind of like in your face fake, like like a
Yeah,
Kool-Aid tasting type
syrupy.
thing.
Yeah,
Yes, the flavors are good. This is gonna be a weird description, but I would describe it as the cleanest caffeine hit that you will kind of ever get. The caffeine, it's like the energy lasts feels like forever, but it has a very even I don't know, this is like bro science that I'm talking probably right now, but it feels very even. In other words, when I drink something else, I get this like the jitters because I'm like, whoa, I just drank whatever it is, insert competitor. But for this, it's like very steady and I just don't feel like I peak and crash like I do with the others. So and that's me like obviously not paid by NOCCO. Like I just think it's a really good product. And I think that's why it's big in CrossFit because CrossFit's very it's a hard community to break into, but if you're in, people are like they're very loyal.
Yeah, 100%. And yet we don't have any of those, people really like those jitters or those tingles, and the product purposefully does not have those. So that was 2014 NOCCO, and then 2016 we launched Barebells, which was the protein bar. And that's a quick summary of all the brands that they've launched or the products that they've launched. But mind you, the company historically has done a lot of different things with these brands. So in a time in Europe, there used to be a Barebells ice cream, there was a Barebells caramel
What?
sauce, there was a
Mm,
Barebells pudding. Like the company has tried so many different things. Again, really in
Wow.
Europe just to see like what can really hit. So in
Yeah.
terms of product development, like I kind of named 3 brands, but like mind you, there's been a lot of things with these brands over the
interesting.
years.
That we're not
Why
even
Um,
aware of. Hmm.
why
yeah,
didn't the water make its way to here? Is there some sort of like American FDA clearance that it can't get or just don't want to
no,
compete with
so
vitamin water?
yeah, I think it's more of like okay, do we want to do the water or do we want to do the energy drink? So when we
Got
launched
it.
in 2019 in the US, I think energy
Yeah.
drinks was a hotter market.
Sure.
I It's curious to think like if we were to relaunch now in 2025 with the way that hydration is super hot right now versus energy
Yeah.
drinks, would we have done vitamin well?
Sure.
Um, maybe. And who's to say, I don't know what their plan is for the future, but like I always push during my time. I'm like, we should bring vitamin well here because I think it
Mm,
would do really well.
Yeah. Very cool.
interesting.
Wow.
How did the bars come about?
Yeah, so 2019 we launched with just the drink, and when I started here, I actually didn't know about any of these other products. To be honest, I just knew about NOCCO. So then late 2019, they're like, "Hey, we have this protein bar. We're gonna launch it in 2020." So they sent us some samples, and both me and my boss are like, "Oh, these are really really good." I don't know much about protein bars. I've never been a protein bar eater myself, so I don't know what it compares to, but I know that this tastes really good. So we were kind of just told January 2020, we're going to launch the bars. And we were kind of going to do the same strategy that we did with the drink was, we have our field sales reps at the time. By this time, we had them in California, Arizona, Florida, New York, kind of our key markets. And we're just going to kind of sell them to CrossFit gyms, bodegas, little independent retailers, whatever we could do to kind of build a base. And hopefully we can take that sales data, go to, a Rouse, a 7-Eleven, a Vaughn, something like that. And be like, hey, we have built this customer base. We'd like to sell your product in the store. That was kind of the thesis that we had.
How did the thesis end up playing out? Was that basically the strategy you ended up going with? Did you get to the Ralphs faster? And I will say also one additional question. It's burned in my brain. Mike and I, before we started Higher Frame, we went and we were looking to buy a small business. We ended up touring and talking to this small, what would you say it was like a packaging distributor company, Mike? It was like
Yeah,
they
a
would
company did
sell,
packaging, sold packaging
yeah,
materials, and did a little bit of packaging
little bit of
itself
coke.
too.
Yes, exactly. But the thing that was burned in my brain from the conversation with the owner of that business was they talked about beverage companies always being their best customers because it was basically like the Wild West where they would just blow up and eventually usually sell to Coke or Pepsi. But they also kind of described it as just this Wild West industry where there's upstarts, aggressive competition. My question to you is, as you're trying to build your business here, did you encounter that as well? What are your own kind of like stories about the Wild West that is the beverage industry?
Yeah, the beverage industry is, you know, sometimes it has a lot of rules, sometimes it doesn't. So
Yeah.
a lot of rules will be like, let's say you're talking to like a Walmart or a Target, they have their own cycles of like they'll bring in beverages every February, let's say. But and you sell it in August and like that's the cycle and there's really no breaking that cycle. Um But then you'll see other things where we at one point we had this. We weren't in Target officially with NOCCO, but we had this kind of like we called it like a license to hunt. So we could go to these Targets in SoCal specifically and like sell it into the store. So
To
we
who?
would be
Who
to
who
like
who would
the
take that
store
meeting?
manager or something.
Wow.
So our sales rep will go in there and be like, "Hey, yeah, whatever." And the guy's like, "Yeah, sure, we can take it. Here's this like free unplanogram space. Put
Huh.
it in there." And then like we would go back in a couple days and then Celsius had come in and like basically taken our spot. So we're gonna take our spot back and put up a hang tag of like, "Hey, here's the price." And then you know how like Target will have those little cafes sometimes in the front of the store. We would be like, okay, can we put the product in the cooler? Because cold product always sells better than non-cold product. So we would like take out some other product, put that in there. So it's just kind of like this daily battle within, especially like that Target example. We did the same thing at independent 7-Elevens. Most 7-Elevens are independent, so we would go in there, sell in Naco, take somebody else's space. So like, let's say there's like 8 rows of Celsius, the person will take away 3 rolls. We'll put in 3 rows of Naco, and then you'll come in later, and Celsius has taken that back. So you just have to go in and merchandise pretty much like a few times a week just to keep that space.
Wow. Yeah, so it is crazy competitive. And you mentioned when you're talking to like say the store manager of Target, are they thinking outside of you said, they would be like, "Hey, I've got this spare space that hasn't been basically spoken for." Do they think beyond that or is there some sense of like, "Okay, you guys are an energy drink. Let me think about what energy drink brands we have right now. Where does this fit in? I'm actually looking for I'm not looking for an energy drink right now. I'm looking for something that like hydration or are they just literally like, "Yeah, I got like, a couple feet over there of square space over there. Take it."
To be honest, I can't speak for their mindset, but I can
Yeah.
speak on like what our sales reps who would do it. And like
Okay.
we had two different kind of distinct sales reps that were really good at it. We had this one guy who was very schmoozy and was like, he's just like your buddy. He was really good. And then we had another guy who was more just, I'm going to annoy you every single day until you say yes to me. And so he would just kind of wear you down, where
Yeah.
the guy's like, fine, just put it in here.
The
Like, don't
hound.
come talk to me anymore.
Yeah.
Yep, yep.
I'll let you
I
put it here
don't
if you
think,
leave.
yeah, I don't think that the guys or the guys at the store were thinking strategically of like, okay, well, this SKU does this
They were
VPO.
they were
No,
they were either relenting or they were just like, "Yeah, this guy's my homie,
this
so
guy's
yeah."
cool. Sure,
Yeah,
put it in. Exactly.
yeah.
Q, what can you tell us about like the scale as you're growing? We're talking about like this early stage, but like as you're describing what a field sales rep does, it's clear that it's like hand to hand combat. They're going into the 7-Eleven location a few times a week. How many sales reps did you have? Or did you start out with these two guys maybe and then did you grow? And I've seen them too come into the gym. They're fantastic. They give away product and that sort of thing.
Yeah, the first year we probably got up to, if I had to map it out, we had like, let's say 6 to 8 of these guys across the country.
Huh. Not as many as I would think.
No, no. LA would have one, San Diego would have one, Arizona would have one, Miami had one, then New York City had one. And then over time, like eventually, maybe LA had two or San Diego had two, and we kind of added probably like two to each market. But when we're talking scale, especially this first year, it's small. I mean, like we were celebrating when we had 50 accounts, and like we would have a Monday morning sales meeting. We're like, okay, guys, we did a good job last week. We sold 1,000 cans, and we're like, okay,
Yeah.
great, cool. And 1,000 cans wholesale is not that much in terms of dollar value. So that first year is really, really small, and we were just happy for every single account that we got that first year.
Got it. Was there like an inflection point?
So the drink business, you need quite a bit of scale, I would say, to be successful, but certainly to be profitable. That inflection point, I would say, more so came year two from the bar perspective when we launched with Trader Joe's. That was in like July of 2020.
We got to ask you for all the CPG founders out there that are, working on a product maybe nights and weekends in trying to launch this thing. How do you get into Trader Joe's?
Yeah, I don't want to disappoint them, but basically what happened is the buyer, the bar buyer, she had known about Barebells because she had been to Europe and tried the product, and she had read some press releases that, hey, Barebells is in the US now. So she reached out and was like, hey, would you be interested if Trader Joe's carried the product? And we're like, absolutely, we would love to do that. Because mind you, at the time, we're selling to Susie Joe's CrossFit at the time and random 7-Eleven in Venice. So that kind of happened in, early spring of 2020. Obviously, we came to a deal and launched soon thereafter. And then that that's pretty much the launching point for the rocket ship that came over the next 5 years.
That was like your big flagship account. And there is no,
Wow.
because Trader Joe's, right, is notorious for typically they don't take other people's products, right? Or I've oftentimes heard that they will kind of use other companies' products as a means for experimenting with like a product category. And then they ultimately are going to come out with their own kind of version of that or something within that category.
Right.
But do they not wanna they don't want to mess around with protein bars, I guess, because I still see it, and it's very clear it's one of the most popular kind of SKUs there because it takes up a lot of shelf space.
Yeah. So for some reason, I don't even know if Trader Joe's makes their own branded protein bar, but if you go to the protein bar section, it's all brands, nationally recognized brands. So I don't know if it's just a vertical that they don't want to touch or they think is too finicky. Because I also know that they're really big on like trying new things and developing new products. And, I've never made or developed my own protein bar. But based on what I know of like our product team does, it's quite difficult to make a good tasting protein bar. So maybe they just don't
Ah,
want to go through the effort.
yeah, that makes total sense.
We've mentioned flavor and taste. It's a kind of subjective, right? But is that one of the key drivers of the success? Just like, hey, like the drink tastes good. Like Tyler described, the caffeine. I like the way, I feel when I drink it. I don't get too jittery. The bars taste good. I know I eat one at least a day. I've tried over like 100 protein bars. And I used to
Yeah.
keep like a spreadsheet of them. Bear Bear is like
I take
Bear
it
is
back.
like
I am not an aficionado. This guy's an
yeah, I was like
aficionado.
Apparently.
tracking things
That is not. I'm lightweight.
like grams of protein per calorie, units of protein per
Right.
calorie and that sort of thing and the
Yeah.
ingredients and Bearbell's like is the best tasting one for sure that I've had. How big of a role do you think that played in Bearbell's or in just, the company's success? And does that extrapolate to like other CPG companies and startups?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that during the early years, especially 2020, 2021, when Trader Joe's is really cooking. For one, if I talk to people today, everyone says that they've tried the bars, like they found the bars at Trader Joe's. So to me, Trader Joe's is by far the number one key for us. But secondly, like we were never really big on like all this ad spend on Google or Facebook and kind of digital ways to gather these customers. We would go to trade shows, we would do sampling events, but nothing like crazy. We weren't spending millions and millions of dollars per month on marketing spend or anything like that. So for us, it was more about the product speaking for itself. And like you said, to this day, a lot of people are still like, "This is the best tasting protein bar that it is." And I think that word of mouth and that organic content that people would create for us on Instagram of like, "Hey, I discovered this product at Trader Joe's. Like, you got to try out this bar." And I think Trader Joe's is the perfect store for that because it has a culture of like, hey, try out these new products. So there's so many pages and people dedicated to just
Totally.
talking about the stuff that they find.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of like a perfect storm for our product and discovering it naturally.
So cool.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know I've literally watched those videos where people are like they're exclusively content creators for Trader Joe's, and all they do is they cover the new products that are coming out. So that makes total sense. So as you guys are scaling, I gotta imagine the complexity of these deals as you go from dealing with, like hardcore CrossFit, box or whatever it is to now giant big box retailer. For yourself personally, like how did you get that experience to actually be able to manage? Because I gotta imagine there's a lot of potential, bad sort of turns that you can take or mistakes that you can make. with those. What were some of the challenges in working with some of these big box retailers, and how did you solve them? And how did you build a team to support you?
So, I mean, the biggest problem that you have, especially on the finance side for any of these larger retails, it's not just as simple of, hey, I'm going to sell you this product for $2 a unit. You're going to sell it. You make your margin. You're happy. I'm happy. There are some retailers or chains like that, but those are few and far between. A lot of them have these rebates and kickbacks. So it's like, okay, I'm going to sell it to you at $2, but every quarter I'm going to bill you back for 20 cents of what I purchased. Plus, if I hit this kind of level of sales, I get an additional 10% off. But if I hit this, I get an additional 15% off. So if you think about like accounting and the accrual basis of how you manage hundreds of different deals like this, that's a huge challenge. And throughout the entire time that I was here, it still was, it was always a huge challenge. So especially because we grew so fast, um, our approach or my approach was, okay, I know that, let's say, 80% of this spend is going to come from our top 40 customers. The bottom 120, I'm just going to leave them. I'm going to be conscious of them and come up with some type of estimate of how I want to track these and at least make sure that they're somewhat relevant. But for these top 40, like I want to really, really be in the weeds. And so what we ended up doing is like having monthly or bi-monthly meetings with the sales reps of just understanding the deals to make sure from an AR perspective, like when they come in, that we're accounting for them appropriately, we're accruing for them, or at least trying to accrue for them appropriately. And I'm saying this all in like this takes months and years for you to really kind of nail down. And even the largest companies, in the world, this is of CPG, this is always going to be your number one headache, so I think we were no different than that. That was always a struggle for us because, like I said, each deal is different, and sometimes there's so many different layers because it's not like, hey, Barebells is in Walmart, for example, but we don't sell it directly to Walmart. That goes through a distributor. That distributor has their own kind of compliance fees or metric fees or on-time delivery fees, and then they deliver to Walmart, who then will charge us sometimes for things. And you kind of have to really be a master of your business. From a finance perspective, you need to know just as much as the sales reps know in this business. You can't just sit back and, be a bean counter, if you will. Like you really need to understand the economics of each deal.
Totally. Plus, you're I imagine, in lockstep communication with the parent company as your part of the company grows, the US region grows so much. How are you forecasting? Because I got to imagine that forecasting becomes extremely complex, and also the consequences there's a much higher, risk, because if you are off, right? Back in the days when you just had 500,000 cans in Carson, that's different than, probably like underestimating or overestimating. So how did you guys handle that?
We kind of did it both two different ways. We mostly did a ground up forecast. So we would have kind of our baseline business. And let's say we thought we were going to get into HEB next year. We would say, okay, HEB is 300 stores. We'll think we'll get 3 SKUs in, or that's what we pitched to them. And we come up with some type of VPO assumption, which is volume per outlet. So like the number of SKUs per day or the number of units per SKU per day per facing that will sell. So I will spit out some type of general number. So we'd come up with this bottoms up approach of just kind of our volume in terms of sales units. We always usually talked in units of a product, whether it be bars or cans. And then my boss and I would kind of just gut check it with what we think, which I know kind of sounds crazy, but forecasting can be as much of an art as it is a science in terms of your knowledge of the business and what this specific customer can do or grow. So, if Trader Joe's was doing, these aren't real numbers, but was doing 100,000 bars a month, I'm like, okay, well, I don't really think it's realistic that next year it's going to do 400,000 bars a month. But I do think it's feasible based on what we've seen in the past 2 years that, we can grow 40% if we add no SKUs. Okay, so we'll do 140. So the biggest thing with our forecast that we had to be accurate on, obviously we want to present the board correct numbers and everything like that, but we need to really be focused on, can we secure enough product to meet that forecast? So if we go and present, hey guys, we're going to go sell 500,000 units next year, but supply chain and our co-man facilities only have a capacity of 400 on a global basis, like, okay, well, we have a problem and now somebody needs to go find this 100. So if all of these dozens of people who work on these teams are going to go find this capacity, like, you need to be damn sure that you're going to sell this product. Otherwise, that's where it becomes really, really difficult. So that's where we were pressured on the most of, hey, you guys said you're going to do this. Like, especially we would always forecast like, years out even. So we would do like even up to 5 years, because if we want to add a new production line or we want to, bring on a new co-man or something, that takes a lot of time. So if you want to order a new production line, it's not something that you can just turn on within 8 months. This is probably a 3-year horizon that you're talking from. We need to order this production line to it's made and it's installed and it's configured and it's up and running to spec. That's probably a 3-year process. So we need to forecast out and be relatively good at that, because, these tens of millions of dollars of decisions making these lines are being made on what we said we're going to sell.
Totally. That makes a lot of sense. As you are scaling, right, and you're team building, you have this dynamic of the parent company, but ultimately you're building your team. How, what did you look for when you were initially hiring, and how did that change over time as you were becoming, effectively like a really big business, even within a bigger business?
Yeah. So I think when we were much smaller, it was kind of, maybe this is wrong, but it felt more to me like a parent-child relationship. So they would kind of help guide, like, okay, maybe you need some help here, or we really want to step up this, so we're going to hire someone for this. Um, from my perspective, so I just hired a lot of people who were more, they didn't have a lot of experience. So like my number two that worked for me I was there for 6 years. I hired her a month after I started and she's still there. She was an EA before. So this is
Wow.
her second job that I hired her to kind of be like,
Cool.
I think her role was like ops specialist, which was basically
Yeah.
just do whatever
Do
I tell
everything.
you to do.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
So I remember at the time, like, we couldn't. I told you about this warehouse we had in Carson who like couldn't really ship product. They couldn't make FedEx labels for some reason. Like they didn't have a shipping account to ship anything on UPS or FedEx, which don't ask me why. So we had to like email our freight broker who did our containers, who would then
Mhm.
send us a label, and then we would email that label to them for every single
Wow.
order that we had. So
And
I
then
was
they
like,
would
okay,
just print, tape. Oh
uh-huh,
my
print
goodness.
and tape.
Crazy.
So like that process, I was like, hey, we're gonna fix this process, but we had to do that. And so obviously if I hired an ops manager who came from like a General Mills or something, I don't want somebody to come in and be like, you're doing it all wrong. This is the way that we need to do it. It's more so just like I want someone who's, guys, we're gonna fix it, but like is just hungry to kind of do what I'm doing, is just figure out things as we go. So that's kind of as we started the first couple of years, that's mostly what I hired, was people to be like, hey, a lot of our stuff is imperfect. These processes aren't great, but like, one, you can put your own spin on it. And secondly, like, we're working on getting it better. As we got to like that 2023, 2024 mark, especially as I talked about like a lot of these customer deals and their rebates and kickbacks, like that's when I tried to really focus on hiring people that had direct experience in that, because the jobs could be much more specialized of, hey, this is your one role. Whereas especially like the early ops people and early finance people, like my first finance hire was, okay, you're doing cash recs, you're doing AP, you're doing AR. Now in a financial control, like segregation of duties, that's not the brightest idea to have some person do all of that. But also at the same time, like I have no choice. So you kind of just have to do it. But now, we have people who are just AR in terms of just collecting credit from customers. Like, hey, you're overdue. Like that's one person's job. Another person is just applying cash to customer accounts. In the early days, you could never do that. So I need more of a jack of all trades versus, hey, I need this specialized person. And then over the years, I realized that as we got more mature as a business, our business in the US has really material differences than the one in Sweden or in Europe, just the way that we operate. A simple one being, these deductions and billbacks and credits that these customers take, whether it be for compliance or the sales process or promos, they just deduct it from the check. So if I'm expecting $100,000 check, I might get a check from this customer for $68,000 and then have 50 lines of different deductions or charges that they're taking from us. Some might be 50
Wow.
cents, some could be $50,000. So we need to kind of go detangle that and process that. But in Europe, what I've been told at least is that customers send them invoices for that. So it's easier to process from an AP perspective, like, okay, we can pay them money versus on an AR side, we kind of have to decipher what it's for and do all this extra work.
Why do Americans must we always overcomplicate, it feels like. It feels like we build entire industries. I think about, like, as you're talking about that, I think about, like, insurance and, like, healthcare. It's like we're always like, "But can we make it more complicated?"
I personally, it's like maybe my conspiracy theorist
Put
in
it
me, not to
on,
say that I
tinfoil
am, but
hat, do it.
tinfoil hat is the more confusing it is, the less you're gonna say, "Hey, this is wrong," and get that
Without
money
a
back.
doubt,
You're just gonna
without
be
a
like,
doubt.
"Oh, it's $1,000. I don't really know what it is. I don't have time to
Yeah.
figure it out." You just
Yep.
give it to them, and they just made $1,000 for doing nothing.
Yeah,
Dude,
that could be
totally.
it.
Yes.
I could see that. We're coming up on the hour, but in the spirit of the podcast, I think maybe we just start to wrap up at least Q and talk about like what worked. Like, you've shared with us a big part of the journey. There's so many details I actually want to offline ask you about now that we've had this conversation. But when you look back, 2019 to 2025, those 6 years, can you distill it down? Like what worked for you guys? And maybe even like if you could go back and do it again, what would you consider doing differently?
I think the number one thing that worked for us is, whether we did $1 million of revenue that year, or we did $100 million of revenue that year. I think the way that we approached our customers on a whole, we never got really too big for our britches. And we've seen that with other competitors. Like they get some success in the market and then they want to raise prices all the time. They don't want to promo as much. We never really took that mentality and we kind of always stayed scrappy, especially from a customer perspective. And so an example of that would be, let's say that we had just launched a bar, like a key lime flavor bar.
Yum, you got my attention.
And yeah, it's actually a really good bar. And so in the grocery space or like Walmart and Target world, like they only normally order 4 packs of products versus 12 packs. So we will launch this and let's say the Walmart buyer was like, "Hey, I really want this 4 pack. Can you launch it in 3 months?" Now, let's say we never forecasted for that. Obviously, Walmart's a huge customer. And maybe we had planned to do it a year from now. They're asking us to do it in 3 months. We would move heaven and earth, whether we're doing 1 billion in revenue or $1 million in revenue to make that happen for that customer. Whereas I think a lot of customers, once you get, or a lot of companies, once you get to a certain size, you're like, "Oh, sorry, we can't do it. We can do it at this timetable." But we would do kind of whatever it takes to kind of make that happen. And we never lost that. And I think that that goes a long way, especially during this world where prices are rising, people are putting on these prices. We are always very conscious of what we would do from a customer perspective. And I think that that went a long way in building trust.
Absolutely, and it's cool to see that. I mean, we're a service business, so that obviously resonates with us. But we don't hear that too often with a company like in CPG space. So that's cool to see that that principle works there too. And I'm sure, yeah, it was a big part of your guys' growth. My final question here is, stop me, and we can of course edit this if I'm
Okay.
incorrect here. But I feel like you're taking some time. You're a good friend of ours, so I always joke you're doing your like
Eat, pray,
Q
love.
yeah, you're doing it. Eat, Pray, Love. Q gets his groove back. Whatever it is. Like, yeah, you're taking a little bit of time before that next adventure. So I will say, I call this whenever I do what worked episodes, I call it like the infomercial. Right? Don't feel the need to sell yourself, but I am more curious if you were to shoot a quick spot where a potential future business partner, employer, whatever you want to say, company that you want to advise. Give a quick bit about what is it that you're looking for in your next opportunity?
I think, look, based on my past experience, I've done a lot of different things. E-cigs, this protein bar company, an accountant, worked at a bank. I've never been it's not to me whether I want to stay in CPG or I'm kind of agnostic to what the industry is. I think I'm just mostly looking for some place that I can learn and kind of take the way that I think and approach of, hey, I didn't know anything about operations or building a protein bar business and putting that onto something else. I don't want to be a cog in a machine of a 50,000 employee company. My interest is in learning and developing my skills and taking my skills and just learning as much as I can, whatever that's about. And if the product is exciting and I can get behind the product or the service, that's all I could ask for.
Absolutely. Can I make a friend to friend recommendation of something that
Sure.
I've been learning about? I think it was the owners of maybe Vita Coco, I want to say, or whatever it might be. But now I've seen it now several times where these successful people in the wellness space, beverage space, I think mostly beverages, they'll go on to basically create like a family office where they have a series of investments, but they also seem to almost run like a little bit of like an accelerator incubator type thing.
Yeah.
I feel like your skill set would be incredible there. And that
Yeah.
wouldn't be just limited to beverage, but that's where I see you. I see you totally doing something like that. And then maybe eventually taking more of a full-time role in one of their investments or sort of incubator companies.
Yeah. That, I mean,
That's what I
I like
see.
that idea. I like that
Yeah,
idea. Yeah.
yeah. I'm your
'Cause you get
agent.
to
I'll start
yeah,
contacting them right now.
exactly. Just set it up, Tyler.
5%. I should have
That's
gone 10%. Damn,
yeah, why'd you
my
st I
negotiating.
I would have said yes right away.
Yeah. Well, I haven't got to all the ad backs and the rebates and
Oh,
everything
okay,
like
yeah, yeah,
that
yeah,
yet.
yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, yeah, that's just the frontline cost.
Well, let me just say that figure you mentioned earlier, picture getting a check of $60,000, but of which I take $50,000. That is
You
definitely
only
what
get
it's gonna
you get a check of
Yeah.
10K. You get a 10K
You
check.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
as you explain this, this is unfortunately like the sort of evil side of my entrepreneur brain. As you explain that, all I kept on thinking about was I was like, "How do Mike and I start a business where we get to pull off shenanigans like that? Here you go. Here's $60,000 that I have taken $50,000 out of."
have ChatGPT write you 100-page terms and conditions something,
Yes,
put in a
yes,
bunch of
yes.
stuff and be like, "Hey, you
Yeah,
signed this. Like,
yeah.
this is my phone call charge back per minute. Like, I had
Yep,
3 phone calls with you,
that's it.
$50 a minute. Boom,
Yep.
done."
That's the prompt will be, "Make this so confusing, they just will be too tired to even question it." That's it.
Exactly, and I have some companies in mind that have really crazy ones, so if you can tell ChatGPT, "Pretend to be this company," then
Yeah,
it'll know.
I love it. Cool. Well, Quentin, it's been awesome. You're obviously a good friend of ours, and it's been so great to see your success. Whatever your next adventure is gonna be, they're gonna be lucky to have you. You're just that awesome combination of extremely smart, extremely you're humble. I just loved when you were talking about how crazy that first office space was, and you were like, "This is it." Like, that's
This
like
is
that's
it.
like that's like Mike too. Mike gets jacked up about that. They call that in the different phases of building a company, there's this analogy where they talk about the dirt road. And the idea is that you're in when you're first starting a company, you're like hacking your way through the jungle, and eventually you want to get to the dirt road. The dirt road becomes, a little bit more of like a paved road, like maybe stones, cobblestone, and then eventually you want to, as a company, you want to get to the highway, right? But different people are going to be better suited for different stages. You are 100% a jungle dirt road guy, and that's probably why you get along so well with us.
Exactly. No, I appreciate that.
That's the title. That's the title of the episode.
That's
Q,
right.
are you on LinkedIn? Where can people find you? If people DM you on LinkedIn, are you gonna be able to reply, or should we just give
Yeah,
out
yeah,
your phone
yeah.
number?
Yes, that is the best place to find me.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, Quentin Thompson. Find him on LinkedIn. We'll put the link in the notes for the show. But thanks, Q. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks,
Thank you
guys,
too.
appreciate it.